I gave my father my left kidney. 9 weeks later, my mother toasted my sister as the one who saved him. The crystal hit the rim with a sound like a small bell. I remember that specific sound, clear, bright, obscenely cheerful, cutting through the ballroom noise at exactly the wrong moment. The moment my mother lifted her glass, tilted her chin, and let those tears she'd been saving all night slide down her cheeks in 2 perfect practiced lines. "To Natalie," she said. Her voice carried the way voices do in rooms designed for performance. "My wonderful, compassionate daughter, the one who truly saved her father's life." 22 glasses flew into the air. I was sitting at table 18, corner of the room, wedged between the kitchen door and a cluster of toddlers who kept dropping forks. My scar was 11 weeks old and still pulled when I breathed too deep. I'd driven 4 hours in a rental car. I couldn't quite afford to be here. I'd bought a dress from a consignment shop in Andersonville, dark green, understated, and I'd pressed it the night before on the ironing board in my studio apartment while a low-grade fever made the walls swim. My name is Olivia Calder Reed. I'm 31 years old. I was an Army captain for 6 years. I hold a Bronze Star. I have exactly 1 kidney. And on that Thursday evening in November, sitting in the corner of the Hartwell Grand Ballroom in the city where I was born and never once made to feel welcome, surrounded by the sound of celebration aimed at someone who had done absolutely nothing, I put both palms flat on the white tablecloth and I started to stand up. That's when the hand grabbed my wrist. Let me take you back, because the toast was just the visible part. It was the tip of something that had been growing underground for 19 years, and you need to understand the roots before you can appreciate what happened when the whole thing finally came up. My mother's name is Claire Wyndham Reed, 61 years old, 3rd generation Boston money on her mother's side, though the money had thinned considerably by the time it reached her. She married my father, Desmond Aldous Reed, when she was 26. He was 32, already building what would become Reed Medical Logistics, a mid-size pharmaceutical supply company headquartered in Chicago. By the time I was born, they had a house in Lincoln Park, a summer place in Door County, and the particular kind of social confidence that comes from never having genuinely struggled. My sister Natalie is 3 years older than me. Natalie Josephine Reed Pierce now. She married a man named Corbin Pierce at 28 in a ceremony that cost more than most people's cars. She has cheekbones that photograph beautifully, an Instagram following of around 40,000, and a talent for being in the room when credit is being handed out that I have spent most of my adult life quietly marveling at. I'm told I look like my Aunt Juliet. Juliet Wyndham died at 29 in a car accident on the Massachusetts Turnpike. She was, by every account I've ever heard, luminous, funny, charismatic in a way that made people feel seen rather than eclipsed. She and Claire were close, supposedly, until they weren't. The falling out happened before I was born. Nobody ever gave me a clear version of the story, but the word I heard most often, in whispered conversations I wasn't supposed to catch, was jealousy. I have Juliet's jaw, her gray-green eyes, the same way of tilting my head when I'm thinking. I found this out at 12, when an aunt visiting from Concord went still in the middle of our kitchen and said quietly, "Oh, Claire, she looks exactly like Jules." My mother didn't speak for the rest of that day. 6 weeks later, I was on a bus to the Trentham Academy for Girls in rural Vermont, with a single suitcase and no explanation beyond, "It'll be good for your education." Natalie stayed home. Natalie was always home. I called from the payphone in the dormitory hallway on my first night. My mother answered, said I should focus on settling in, and handed the phone to my father, who told me he was proud of me and that time would go fast. It didn't, but I learned how to move through it anyway. I made friends. I ran track. I got a 4.1 GPA. I learned that when people don't give you a soft place to land, you can build your own calluses and land hard. At 18, I enlisted. The Army recruiter came to the community college job fair near my apartment. I'd rented a room from a retired teacher named Margot in Burlington while I figured out what came next. And something about the conversation felt like someone finally speaking in a language I already knew. Structure, purpose, accountability. No one was grading you on how much they liked your face. Nobody drove me to the enlistment office. I took the bus. My father collapsed on the evening of July 20th at the Reed Medical Logistics Summer Gala. He was giving a toast, irony noted, when his legs went. Security footage later showed him reaching for the podium as he went down. He was 63 years old and had been quietly managing the early stages of polycystic kidney disease for 4 years without telling anyone outside of my mother and his personal physician, Dr. Raphael Okonkwo. By the time the ambulance reached Northwestern Memorial, both kidneys were failing. Stage 4. The attending nephrologist, Dr. Priya Subramaniam, was direct with the family. Without a transplant, he'd be on dialysis within 8 weeks, and looking at a window of perhaps 2 to 3 years beyond that. He needed a living donor. He needed one fast. I found out from a cousin who texted me, dad is in the hospital. No capitals. 3 words. I was stationed at Fort Bragg at the time. I'd left active duty 2 years prior, but was doing contractor work for a logistics consulting firm that subcontracted with the DoD, which meant I still had contacts, still moved in military circles, still kept the habits of discipline that 6 years of service had drilled into my skeleton. I put in for emergency personal leave that night, drove to Raleigh-Durham in 3 hours, and caught a 6 a.m. flight to O'Hare. There was a blizzard coming in off the lake. A real one. The kind that makes Chicago look like a snow globe shaken by an angry god. By the time I landed, my phone showed 6 inches on the ground and still falling. I rented a car from the Hertz desk desk, a gray Chevy Equinox that smelled faintly of someone else's fast food, and drove to the hospital with my hazards on the whole way. I found the family in the VIP waiting lounge on the 4th floor, because of course Northwestern had a VIP waiting lounge, and of course my family had access to it. Claire was in a cream cashmere sweater, a string of pearls, and an expression I recognized from childhood, the one that meant she was performing composure for an audience. Natalie sat beside her in an identical posture, scrolling her phone. When I pushed through the door, wet to the knees from the slush I'd walked through in the parking garage, my mother looked up. The expression shifted. Something tightened around her eyes. Olivia, not a greeting, more like a notation. "Where is he?" I said. "He's being assessed. You weren't on the guest list for the gala. How did you even—" "He's my father." I moved toward the hallway that connected to the ICU. "I want to see him." My mother stepped into my path. She physically moved to block the doorway. 61 years old, 5'4", and she planted herself in front of me with the absolute conviction of a woman who had never once doubted her right to occupy space. "The doctors are with him," she said. "There's nothing you can do." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I walked around her. "I got tested on July 23rd. The transplant coordinator was a woman named Delia Ferris. 14 years in organ transplant coordination at Northwestern, which she mentioned not out of pride, but the way doctors mention credentials when they want you to understand they've seen enough to take things seriously. She walked me through the compatibility screening with brisk efficiency, blood type, tissue matching, cross-matching. She told me the results would take 3 to 5 days and not to get my hopes up. That living donor compatibility at this specificity was statistically uncommon. She called me at 7:42 a.m. on July 26th. "Captain Reed," she said. She still called me Captain even though I'd corrected her twice. "Your compatibility score is 98%. I've been doing this for 14 years. I've seen a 98 twice." I sat on the edge of the bed in my childhood bedroom. Claire had begrudgingly allowed me to stay in the house during testing, though she'd given me the guest room in the basement rather than my old room, which had apparently been converted into a home office. And I held the phone against my ear and looked at the water stain on the low ceiling and thought about what it meant to be 98% compatible with someone who had never fully let you in. "I'll do it," I said. Natalie, for what it's worth, had been tested the same day. She called me 4 hours after Delia's call to tell me that she might be pregnant. She and Corbin had been trying, and that she simply couldn't risk surgery. Her OB had advised against it. She'd looked into egg preservation just in case, she said, because she was really taking this seriously. She was not pregnant. I know because 3 months later she posted a Pilates photo on Instagram with a caption about body goals. But I didn't know that yet. I signed the consent forms at 2:07 in the morning on July 28th, sitting alone at the kitchen table in the basement guest room, with a pen I'd borrowed from the night shift nurse because I'd left mine upstairs. The forms were 12 pages. I read every one. The surgery was scheduled for August 4th. On August 3rd at approximately 4 p.m., my mother walked into the office of Dr. Marcus Bellwether, chair of Northwestern's Transplant Ethics Committee, board certified in both nephrology and biomedical ethics, 31 years of practice, and told him that I suffered from severe untreated PTSD following my military service, that I was psychologically unstable, and that the consent I had given was not meaningfully informed. I know this because Dr. Bellwether documented the conversation. He was required to. Ethics committee inquiries of that nature generate a formal transcript, time-stamped and entered into the hospital record. I didn't see that transcript until December, but I'm getting there. Dr. Bellwether told my mother that the transplant team had administered the standard psychological evaluation and found no contraindications. He told her that if she had specific clinical evidence of psychological instability, she was welcome to present it to the committee formally. My mother said, according to the transcript, then simply cancel the surgery. Dr. Bellwether explained that cancellation at this stage, without a replacement donor, would accelerate my father's renal failure to a near certain fatal outcome within weeks. My mother paused, and then she said, "Then that is his fate. I will not have that girl back in this house as a hero. She would have let him die. I want you to sit with that, not to harm me, not to protect anyone, just so that I didn't win." The surgery proceeded on August 4th. I was in recovery for 6 days at Northwestern. Then I was discharged. I drove myself home to my studio apartment in Rogers Park because Natalie had offered to pick me up, and then texted at 8 a.m. the morning of discharge that something had come up with a charity event. My father was still in the ICU. The surgery had gone well. Dr. Okonkwo described the kidney's integration as textbook, and my mother was there with him every day. A fact I knew because Natalie sent me updates with the emotional register of someone reporting weather conditions. Dad doing better, mom staying positive, doctors happy with numbers. Coming home maybe Friday. Dad mentioned you. He's grateful. I lay on my couch for 3 days with a fever of 101. 4, pressing a pillow against my left side because the position created slight counter pressure on the incision, and that helped slightly with the fire that lived there around the clock. I had antibiotics. They'd caught a post-surgical infection at the follow-up, a low-grade thing that my GP, Dr. Constance Markley, treated with a 14-day course of Augmentin and genuine alarm at the fact that I had no one to check on me. She made me promise to call her if the fever went above 102. "Do you have family in Chicago?" she asked. I told her I did. "Are they?" "I'll be fine," I said. My medical bills arrived over the course of September and October. Living donor surgery is covered differently depending on insurance architecture. In this case, my father's insurance was supposed to cover donor costs, which his insurance insurance broker, a man named Todd Fish at Meridian Group, had assured the hospital it would. What actually happened was that a clerical error during the policy transfer, which my mother handled because she handled all household paperwork, resulted in my donor expense claim being routed to an inactive policy number. By the time anyone caught it, the window for certain submissions had technically closed. I found myself holding $11,400 in medical bills. My bank account was overdrawn by $340. I was making $64,000 a year in contractor work, had $3,800 in savings before the surgery, and had spent roughly $2,200 on travel, lodging, and missed work costs during the testing and recovery period. My kidney was in my father's body, functioning at 92% capacity. Meanwhile, in October, the Natalie Reed Pierce Kidney Health Initiative launched. I found out about it the way I found out about most things regarding my family, accidentally, through someone else's social media. A woman I'd served with at Bragg, Sergeant First Class Danielle Troop, sent me a screenshot with a message that just said, "Is this your sister?" It was a magazine spread, full color, 3 pages in Chicago Society Quarterly. Natalie in a white blazer at a charity gala, holding a giant ceremonial check for $83,000 made out to the Northwestern Transplant Center. The headline was, "Legacy of Love, How One Woman Turned Her Family's Tragedy into a Cause." 3 paragraphs about sacrifice, about the courage it takes to mobilize a community around medical need, about Natalie's deep personal connection to the cause. My name appeared nowhere, not in the article, not in the photo captions, not in the pull quotes, not in the donor acknowledgement section at the bottom, where the list of contributors included a $41,500 matching gift from Reed Medical Logistics. A matching gift that, per the IRS rules their corporate accountant had clearly read carefully, would generate a tax deduction of exactly $41,500. My kidney had become their tax shelter. I sat on my kitchen floor. I was still moving carefully then, still feeling the pull of the healing incision when I sat on hard surfaces, and I read the article 4 times. Then I set my phone face down and looked at the water damage on the wall above the radiator and thought about my options. I could call, I'd tried calling, I could show up, I'd tried showing up, I could write a letter, I could talk to a journalist, I could post something online. But I had no documentation beyond my own memory and my medical records, which were private. I had no proof of what had been done. I was a woman with a fresh scar, an overdrawn account, and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting the same battle for so long that your bones have started carrying the weight of it. I did not yet know about the ethics committee transcript. I did not yet know what my father had been doing since September. I refilled my water glass. I took my evening antibiotic. I went to bed. Thanksgiving was my idea in a way. Not the dinner itself. That was Claire's annual production, always held at the Hartwell Grand because the house wasn't large enough for the full family, which was a statement about aesthetics rather than square footage. But I drove to that dinner. I drove because my father had called me, not texted, called. His voice on the phone was different from what I remembered, quieter in a specific way, stripped of the social performance layer he'd always carried. He said he wanted to see me at Thanksgiving. He said, please. I left Rogers Park at 2 p.m. with a green cashmere dress from the consignment shop in Andersonville, the specific knowledge that I would be seated at the worst table in the room, and no particular plan beyond attendance. The seating chart confirmed what I'd expected. Table 18, corner, kitchen adjacent. I was placed between a great aunt with hearing aids who was there for the mashed potatoes and a cluster of toddlers belonging to cousins I barely recognized. The main family tables, tables 1 through 4, were arranged near the front, where the light was better and the servers circled most attentively. I watched my father at table 1. He looked thin. He moved carefully. There was something different in how he carried himself, something I'd never seen in him before, which was the particular stillness of a man who has looked at the limit of his life and come back changed by the view. He caught my eye once across the room, around 7 p.m. His expression was unreadable in the ballroom light. At 7:43 p.m., my mother stood up. The room settled into attention the way rooms do when Claire Reed signals that she intends to speak. She lifted her glass. She arranged her tears. She said the words, to Natalie, my wonderful, compassionate daughter, the one who truly saved her father's life. 22 glasses went up. I put my hands on the table, started to rise. A hand shot out from beneath the tablecloth and closed around my left wrist. My father was crouched beneath the long white linen at the end of table 18, crouching. A 63-year-old man recovering from a kidney transplant, crouching on a ballroom floor, hidden from the sightlines of his wife and older daughter by 40 feet of people and tablecloths and architectural geometry. His face, when I looked down at him, was pale and burning at the same time. He pressed a folded cocktail napkin into my palm with both hands, like a man passing something fragile, like a man completing a transaction that had taken months to arrange. Then he straightened smoothly and returned to table 1. Nobody saw him. Nobody was looking at table 18. I unfolded the napkin under the table, in my lap, with the toddler to my left trying to hand me a plastic fork he found interesting. The handwriting was shaky, fast. My father's hand, but urgent, like words written by someone who doesn't know how much time they have. Medical power of attorney, yours. $2.3 million insurance, sole beneficiary. 51% voting shares. Transferred September 15th. They have no idea. Burn the whole house down. I read it twice. Then I folded it and put it in my clutch, next to my lip balm and my phone. Across the room, Natalie laughed at something Corbin said. Claire touched her shoulder. 22 relatives clinked glasses glasses that were still raised in celebration of a woman who had done nothing. I reached for my water glass. My hand was perfectly steady. I noticed that, specifically, my hand's steadiness, the absence of shaking, and filed it away as important information about my own state of mind. I finished my dinner. I said goodbye to the great aunt with the hearing aids. I drove back to Rogers Park and sat in my car in the parking structure for 11 minutes with the engine running, thinking. Then I went upstairs and opened my laptop. The attorney's name was Meredith Solano Graves, 44 years old, University of Chicago Law, 17 years specializing in corporate litigation and succession law. I'd found her 3 months earlier, had started this research quietly, out of some instinct I didn't fully understand yet, the way you prepare for a storm you can feel without being able to see. I'd had one preliminary conversation with her in October, just exploratory, nothing filed. She'd told me that if the documents I was describing were real and legally executed, I should come back with proof. I texted her at 11:47 p.m. I have the proof, can we meet Monday? She responded at 7:02 a.m. Monday at 9. Bring the napkin and whatever else you have. I drove to her office on West Randolph 2 days later with the napkin, my medical records, my medical bills with the routing error documentation, the screenshot of the Chicago Society quarterly article, Danielle's text thread, and the name of Dr. Marcus Bellwether, who I was betting had a transcript he hadn't destroyed. Meredith opened the first manila folder. She read. She opened the second. She read. She looked up and said, "The shares are dated September 15th. The day I went under the knife," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The Ethics Committee transcript. You said there's documentation. I haven't confirmed it exists, but Delia Ferris told me off the record that an inquiry was logged." Meredith wrote something in the margin of her notepad. "I'll subpoena it. If the content is what you're describing, that's not just family ugliness. That's potentially actionable tortious interference with a medical procedure and documented evidence of intent to cause your father's death for estate purposes." She paused. "Do you understand what you're about to do?" "I'm going to take my seat," I said. She looked at me for a moment, then she picked up her phone and started scheduling. The Reed Medical Logistics Emergency Board meeting was called for December 16th at 2 p.m. The notice went out to all 7 board members, the lead corporate counsel, a man named Preston Ashby, 22 years in corporate governance, and the company's 3 largest institutional investors. The notice came from the office of the majority shareholder. That was me. I dressed that morning like I was suiting up, not in the green consignment dress. In my army dress uniform, the one I'd stored in dry cleaning bags since my last official function, pressed and decorated and carrying everything I'd earned. I didn't do it for theater. I did it because it was mine, because I wanted to walk into that room wearing the evidence of who I was. I arrived at Reed Medical's Michigan Avenue office at 1:53 p.m. I didn't knock. Claire was at the head of the conference table. Of course she was. She'd been managing the company in my father's recovery, and had apparently come to think of that seat as hers. Natalie was to her right, in a cream blazer that matched the one from the magazine spread. 6 board members I recognized from company holiday cards were arranged around the table with the careful stillness of people who sense something wrong but haven't yet identified it. Preston Ashby was at the far end with 2 associates and a stack of folders. I walked to the head of the table and dropped a document in front of Ashby without breaking stride. He looked down. His face shifted, the micro-expression of a lawyer whose brain is reordering his understanding of the room. "Mr. Ashby," I said, "that is the Ethics Committee transcript from Northwestern Memorial Hospital dated August 3rd of this year. I would like you to read aloud the paragraph that begins at line 47. Olivia," Claire's voice, the performance composure register, but strained now. "This isn't Mr. Ashby," I said again, without looking at my mother. Ashby read. His voice was professionally flat, the tone of a man who has learned to present information without editorializing. But you can only flatten a voice so much when the words themselves do the work. He read the part where my mother said cancellation would mean my father's death. He read the part where she said then, that is his fate. He read the part, and here his voice paused, just slightly, before continuing, where she said, "I will not have that girl back in this house as a hero." The room was completely silent, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful, the kind that has weight and texture. One of the board members, a woman named Ingrid Castellano Birch, who'd been at Reed Medical since the beginning, and whom my father had trusted for decades, made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. The sound of something landing. Claire's face had turned the color of old chalk. Her mouth was open. Nothing was coming out. I looked at her. I had been waiting for this moment since a 12-year-old girl stood at a bus stop with a suitcase and no explanation. I had been waiting for it through 6 years of military service, and a surgery and a fever, and a stack of bills I couldn't pay, and a toast at Thanksgiving at table 18 in the corner next to the kitchen. I said exactly 5 words. "Get up. That's my seat." She didn't move. I'm not sure she could. Her brain was still running the calculation, the one where she was the injured party, the one where she had done nothing wrong, the one where the world was arranged according to her preferences, and I was the disruption. I leaned down. I put my mouth close to her ear. I said the thing I had prepared, the thing I had written and revised and carried until I knew it in my sleep. I told her that I knew she had tried to cancel the surgery, that I knew she would have let my father die, that I had the transcript, and so did my attorney, and so did the hospital's legal team, because Meredith had ensured that Bellwether's documentation was formally entered into the hospital's legal record, making it discoverable. I told her that the majority shares were mine, the power of attorney was mine, and that every financial decision she had made in this company since September was now subject to my review. I told her that the Kidney Health Initiative's tax documentation had been referred to a forensic accountant, and that using a family donor's unreimbursed surgery as the basis for a corporate charitable matching scheme without the donor's knowledge or consent was something the IRS found interesting. I told her one more thing, the thing that made her face collapse entirely. I told her that Dad had written her a letter, that he'd given it to Meredith to hold, sealed, that he'd told Meredith to open it only if something happened to him, that I didn't know what was in it, but that the fact of its existence, and the fact that he'd chosen to give his majority shares and his medical power of attorney to the daughter she'd spent 19 years erasing, told a story all by itself. I told her that I wasn't there to hurt her, that hurting her had never been the point. I'm just here, I said, to take what's mine. Claire stood up, her chair scraped back hard. She looked, for just a moment, before the mask went back up, like a woman who had built her entire sense of herself on a foundation that had just given way beneath her feet, like someone standing in the ruins of something she thought she'd built to last. Natalie looked at me. I looked at her. There was a long moment where neither of us spoke. Then I sat down at the head of the table, and I opened the agenda Meredith had prepared, and I said, let's get started. 4 months later, the Reed Medical Board voted in January to launch a formal audit of the Kidney Health Initiative, with findings reported to the Illinois Attorney General's Charitable Oversight Division. The forensic accountant, a woman named Carrie Osei from a firm on LaSalle Street, found that the $41,500 corporate match had been structured without formal disclosure of the pre-existing family relationship between the charity's founder and the donor, which is a problem under both IRS charitable giving guidelines and Illinois corporate governance law. No criminal charges were filed, but the initiative was dissolved, and the $83,000 it had raised was redirected to Northwestern's General Transplant Fund. Natalie retained counsel. The Instagram account went quiet. My father came to see me in Rogers Park on a Tuesday in February. He drove himself carefully. His doctor had said he could drive again in January, and parked his car on the street like a regular person and buzzed my apartment. I made coffee. We sat at my kitchen table, which is small, and we talked for 3 hours. He didn't ask for forgiveness, which was smart because I wasn't there yet. He explained September, that after the surgery, lying in recovery, he'd had a long time to think about the choices he'd watched Claire make for 20 years and the choices he'd made by staying silent. He said he'd consulted Meredith through a private arrangement, separately from the family attorney. He said it was the most important decision he'd made since marrying the wrong woman. I asked him why he'd waited so long. He thought about it and said, I kept hoping I wouldn't have to. I understood that more than I wanted to. Dr. Priya Subramaniam sent me a note in January, which I didn't expect. She'd heard through Delia Ferris about the ethics committee transcript and what had come of it. She said she was glad I had gotten what I was owed. She said, and I appreciated this, that she hoped my recovery was complete, meaning the physical one, though she seemed to understand the word had more than one application. My incision scar is silver now, flat and clean. It pulls sometimes when I've been sitting too long, a faint reminder that something was taken out of me and given to someone else. I don't mind it. I've earned stranger things. My father's kidney function, as of his last labs, is at 94%. That kidney has my DNA in it. It is, in the most literal sense, a part of me living inside a man who is trying, late and imperfectly, to deserve it. I moved out of the studio in Rogers Park in March. I found a 2-bedroom in Logan Square. More space than I need, but I wanted windows. I wanted light. I wanted to wake up in a room that was mine in the way that things can be yours when you fought for them rather than inherited them. My medical bills were paid in full in November through a settlement with the insurance carrier that Meredith negotiated in approximately 40 minutes. The clerical error in the policy routing had been, as she put it to opposing counsel, suspiciously convenient. The carrier disagreed with that characterization and settled immediately. I still have the cocktail napkin. It's in a glass frame above my desk, not for sentimentality exactly, but because I want to remember that sometimes the thing that saves you is handed to you by someone crouching on the floor, hidden under a tablecloth, hoping they have enough time left to make it right. Burn the whole house down, he wrote. I didn't burn it. I just showed everyone what was already on fire.